On my 70th birthday, my daughter introduced me to a stranger as her mother, Margaret or Marlene, something like that, and then laughed like it was charming. I stood there in my new cardigan, the one I'd ordered weeks ago from a catalogue, just for that day, holding a plate of tiny salmon sandwiches I hadn't asked for, blinking against the shimmer of balloons someone else had chosen. I'm Eleanor Ruth Avery, 70. And that was the moment I knew they had already let me go. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The stranger, some neighbor from their tennis club, maybe smiled at me kindly. I smiled back. Because I still know how to be polite, even when my name is lost in my daughter's mouth like a coin dropped between couch cushions. I'd spent the morning pretending to be excited. I ironed my blouse with trembling hands. I had chosen silver earrings, the ones my husband gave me before his memory began disappearing. I had stared at myself in the mirror, practicing a smile that didn't look rehearsed. They'd booked a hall I'd never seen, north of the city, in a suburb with new houses that all look like model homes, sharp corners, polished surfaces, no dust in the corners. The kind of place that doesn't know the smell of old soup on a stove or the softness of slippers waiting by a heat event. My granddaughter, the one I raised when her mother was too busy finishing law school, kissed my cheek like I was a guest of honor. Then she checked her phone mid-sentence. When I opened the gift she handed me, it was a Bluetooth speaker. I didn't say I didn't know how to use one. I just smiled, nodded, and set it beside my plate. There was a cake. 3 tiers, white and sterile with icing flowers that looked like they'd been piped on by a machine. I remember when cakes used to taste like something, like vanilla or cinnamon or effort. This one tasted like the plastic knife it came with. Nobody asked me what kind of music I liked. The playlist someone had set blared unfamiliar pop songs. A few times I tried to speak about my garden, about the way the apple tree had finally bloomed again after years of barren limbs, but the conversation would shift before I could finish. I left early. Told them I was tired, which was true. I hugged each of them the way I'd learned to, briefly, politely, like I wasn't holding years of them inside my arms. On the train ride home, I stared at my reflection in the window. There was a smear of lipstick on my tooth. Nobody had told me. When I got back to my apartment, I reheated leftover stew and sat in silence. The candle on my table burned down to a stub. I hadn't even blown one out at the party. I think that's what stayed with me, more than the forgotten name or the Bluetooth speaker. No one had asked me to make a wish. I've been a mother for 47 years. Before that, a wife. Before that, a daughter who never spoke out of turn. I've held babies through fevers, stayed up past midnight to finish costumes, baked birthday cakes from scratch with little gumdrop flowers. But on the day I turned 70, surrounded by my family, I became invisible. It didn't happen all at once. Of course, it never does. But that moment when my name hung in the air like an afterthought, and my granddaughter texted while I opened her gift, and the cake didn't taste like anything, that was the day I knew I wasn't really there for them anymore. I was a role to be honored, a duty to fulfill, a photo op, not a person, not a name worth remembering, just someone's mother or grandmother or a Margaret or Marlene or something like that. I watched them all through the train window as it pulled away, my reflection layered over theirs. They were already laughing again, already moving on to the next thing. I used to think love meant staying no matter what, that family was thicker than disappointment, that your children would never stop seeing you. I was wrong. And a week later, I did something they didn't expect, but I'll tell you about that soon. First, you need to know what I did for them. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when my phone rang for me, when the sound of mom or grandma wasn't hollow like a title inherited, but a name spoken with need and love and familiarity. A time when I could open a drawer and find birthday cards with handprints painted in Vic primary colours or shaky crayon letters that spelled I love you, Nana. With backwardens and too many hearts, I kept those cards for years. Still, have a few in a showbox under the bed. They don't know what I gave them, not really. When my daughter, Susan, was born in 1976, I left college, not out of shame, but necessity. My husband, Paul, was already working long hours in a warehouse, and someone needed to be home. We had a small apartment in Elmhurst then, one window in the kitchen faced an alley. And the bathroom pipes groaned like ghosts in the winter, but I made it home. With mismatched curtains and a second-hand couch, I made it ours. Susan had croup once when she was 2. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor with her all night, running the hot water so the steam could help her breathe. I held her upright against my chest, whispering nonsense. Singing lullabies until my voice was hoarse. By sunrise, the mirror was fogged over, and I had sweat through my nightgown, but she was finally sleeping. She never remembered that night, but I did, and when Mark came along 3 years later, it was the same. I stitched patches onto his jeans. I made birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs and pirate ships. I taught him to tie his shoes. 2 count. In 2s to hold the door open for people. I still remember how his face lit up the first time he read a full sentence on his own. He grinned like he'd discovered fire. Paul worked, a lot. And when he didn't work, he was tired. I don't blame him now, not really. But for most of those early years, I was the one carrying the household on my back. I knew every dental appointment, every spelling test, every time one of them forgot their lunchbox. I knew their friends' names, their teachers, their dreams. No one took pictures of the nights I stayed up sewing costumes or ray-gluing school projects. No one saw the hours I spent ironing Paul's shirts, just right, because he liked the sleeves pressed flat. Not creased. There were decades when no one said thank you, and back then I didn't expect it. Gratitude wasn't something we asked for, it was a luxury. In 1989, when Paul's mother, my mother-in-law, had a stroke, I was the one who moved her in. She stayed in the guest room for nearly a year while we adjusted her medications, found the right chair. Bathed her, fed her soft meals, I remember. Spooning mashed carrots into her mouth like she was a baby bird. No one else wanted to do it, and so I did. I did a lot of things no one else wanted to do. Like when Mark lost his job in 2003 and moved back home with his wife and baby. Susan had just divorced her second husband and was staying with me temporarily too. I remember nights where every room was full and I slept on the pull-out couch. I was in my late 40s by then. Every joint hurt in the morning, but I kept the fridge stocked. I rocked my granddaughter to sleep when her mother needed to take a walk. I lent them money without calling it a loan. I paid for Susan's dental surgery in 2006. She never brought it up again. Just smiled at Christmas like it was assumed, like the gifts just appeared under the tree like magic. When Paul got sick in 2011, I became a caregiver again. He'd been forgetful for a while, misplacing keys, repeating himself, but when he poured orange juice into the kettle one morning, I knew it was something more. The doctors said dementia, slowly at first, then rapidly, and then everything fell apart. My life turned into medication charts and wandering episodes and calls from neighbors when he left the house in his pajamas. For 6 years I didn't sleep. A full night. I cleaned him, fed him, lost him, found him. I sang to him when he forgot my name. I watched him disappear by inches, until all that was left was a shell of the man who once danced with me in the living room. Barefoot, with a dish towel over his shoulder. The kids visited, sometimes brought coffee, stayed an hour, left early. When Paul died in 2017, they helped with the funeral. Susan ordered the flowers. Mark gave a short speech about how strong his father was. I stood next to the casket in a dress I hadn't worn since my niece's wedding and thought, this is what a lifetime adds up to: a slideshow of smiling faces, a plate of cookies, and then silence. After that, they wanted me to move in with one of them, said it wasn't safe to live alone, but I didn't want to be a burden, so I said no. I got an apartment in the quiet part of town. Near the old library, I started baking again, volunteering. At the thrift store, I got used to eating alone, drinking coffee alone, laughing at old sitcoms alone. They stopped calling as much. Some weeks passed in complete silence. I'd water the violets on my windowsill and watch as the seasons changed outside, wondering if anyone would notice if I didn't show up for Christmas, but I still showed up. I brought casseroles, I babysat when asked, I remembered birthdays always. I sent cards with cash tucked inside, even when my savings dipped low. I sat at soccer games and recitals, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I kept the stories of their childhoods alive. I reminded them of who they had been, who I had been to them. I kept giving. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We give until there's nothing left, and then we give a little more, but they didn't see it, or maybe they did. And they didn't think it mattered anymore. Maybe they believed the giving was over, that my part in the story had been written, closed, filed away. But a woman doesn't stop existing when her children no longer need her. She just becomes quieter, less noticed. She slips between conversations, remembered only in the way someone recalls an old recipe, or a scent from childhood, faint and distant, never urgent. I gave them my whole life. I braided their hair, folded their laundry, sat through their silences. I was there, always there, and yet on my 70th birthday, no one remembered my name. I used to think they forgot slowly, that it was just the way of things. But now I wonder if they were never really paying attention to begin with. What they don't know is that the silence they gave me, the one they think I should have gotten used to, has grown sharp. And soon they'll notice the difference, because a week after that birthday, I made a choice. But that part of the story comes next. There's a kind of erosion that doesn't shake the earth or leave visible cracks. It doesn't come in storms or screams. It's slow, like water against stone, patient, relentless. That's the kind of forgetting I lived through. Not a dramatic abandonment, just the soft, daily silencing of a person until all that remains is the echo of who they used to be. It started with the phone calls. There was a time I couldn't finish folding laundry without the phone ringing, Susan asking if I could pick up the dry cleaning, Mark wondering how long to roast a chicken. For years, I was the helpline, the one who remembered everything. Then it changed. First, the calls got shorter, 5 minutes, 3, a quick just checking in. Then they came only on holidays. Then not even then, I'd call them sometimes, just to hear their voices, and the tone would always carry that breathless distance, like I'd interrupted something important. A meeting, a nap, a life that had closed its door to me quietly. And it wasn't just the phone, there were birthdays missed, not out of malice, but indifference. I remember one year, I think it was my 66th, when Mark sent a gift card that had already been used. I didn't tell him. I just smiled into the phone, said thank you, and tossed it into the drawer with the others. By then, I had a collection of things that were never quite right, wrong sizes. Duplicates, a bathrobe still with the tag. I kept them all. It felt like admitting something to throw them away. I didn't ask for much. I never have. But the small things started adding up. I'd invite them for dinner, and they'd say they were busy. Then I'd see pictures later them at restaurants, smiling over cocktails I couldn't pronounce. I'd comment something kind, and Susan would reply 3 days later with a heart emoji, as if that closed the distance. Sometimes I think it's worse to be half remembered than entirely forgotten. One Sunday, I dropped off banana bread at Susan's her favourite, made with walnuts and a little cinnamon. I left it in a tin with a note. She never mentioned it. I wondered if she'd even known I'd been there. Maybe her husband tossed it, or maybe she thought it was from a neighbour. That week, I saw a story on the news about porch thieves stealing packages. For a second, I hoped someone had taken it. At least then, someone would have enjoyed it. I've been alone on more holidays than I care to admit. I never told anyone I'd buy myself a small roast, open a bottle of wine, light a candle, and pretend I liked the quiet. One Christmas Eve, I sat in my robe watching It's a Wonderful Life, and the power went out. I sat there in the dark for an hour, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind scratch at the window like something was trying to get in. No one called, no one knew, but the forgetting wasn't just passive. Sometimes it was sharp. There was the time Susan asked me not to wear my favourite perfume and the children anymore. It's too old-fashioned, Mom. They say it smells weird. That bottle had lasted me over 20 years. Paul bought it for me in 1995 in a duty-free shop at O'Hare. One spritz, and I was £20 lighter, dancing barefoot in the kitchen again. But I put it away, haven't worn it since. Or when Mark corrected me at dinner because I mispronounced a word, said it loud enough that everyone laughed. I wasn't even embarrassed, just tired. Tired of always being the one who had to pretend it didn't sting. I smiled like it was a joke. It wasn't, and then came the appointments. As Paul's health declined, I became fluent in hospitals. I could read an MRI like a map, knew the names of every nurse on the floor. But after he passed, when my own knees began to give out, when the arthritis stiffened my fingers until even writing hurt, no one offered to come with me. I'd sit in waiting rooms alone, holding a folder full of questions no one would ask on my behalf. One time, after a minor procedure, I waited outside in the cold for 20 minutes because Mark said he'd pick me up, but forgot. He apologized with a text that said, "Sorry, got tied up." "You good?" I lied. Said yes. They've forgotten how to look at me. Really look. Like the time I wore a new sweater to dinner, soft blue, cable knit, one I'd saved up for. No one noticed. But when my granddaughter wore something similar too. Weeks later, everyone complimented her like she'd invented it. I remember touching my own sleeve under the table, like I needed to confirm it was still there. 100 quiet hurts. That's what I've carried. Not one big wound, just a series of tiny slices. Paper thin, invisible, but deep all the same. And the worst part, I let them, because mothers are trained in silence. We're taught to be background music, steady and soft. We know how to hold back tears so they don't drown the people we love. We learn how to smile while swallowing disappointment like aspirin. But something shifted after that birthday. Not all at once, and not with fury. Just a realization. The way fog clears and suddenly you see the outline of a cliff you've been standing on for years. They didn't see me, not anymore, and I couldn't keep clinging to a role they'd already recast in their lives, not when they needed me to stay quiet, small, agreeable. I started writing things down, not to share, just to remember. I wrote their names, their birthdays, favorite foods, the way they used to cling to my legs when they were small. How Mark couldn't sleep without his bear, how Susan once cried because her goldfish died and I told her it went to fish heaven. I wrote all of it, pages and pages, because if they were going to forget, someone had to remember. That journal became a kind of prayer, a monument, proof that I was there, that I mattered once. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. They weren't cruel people, just careless, distracted by their own noise. But carelessness, when repeated, is its own form of betrayal. And after 70 years of giving, I was tired, not bitter, not angry, just done. And in that silence, something new began to grow. It was faint at first, like the first green bud pushing through cracked pavement. a thought, a plan, because a week after that birthday, I did something they never expected, and the truth is, I never expected it of myself either. It had rained the morning I found out. Just a soft, steady rain that made everything smell like damp leaves and concrete. I remember watching the water streak down my window while I made my tea chamomile with a little honey. I was standing at the kitchen sink, holding the mug in, both hands waiting for the warmth to reach my fingers when the envelope caught my eye. It had been slipped under my door, not mailed, no stamp, just slid across the linoleum like a message someone didn't have the courage to deliver properly. I remember the envelope because it was thick, heavier than most. My name was written on it in Susan's handwriting, neat, careful letters like the ones she used to make on school projects. At first, I thought it was a card, maybe a late apology for the birthday. Maybe they had noticed, after all. But it wasn't. Inside was paperwork, stacked, clipped, and already signed in places where my name should have been. At first, I didn't understand. I read the first page 3 times, then flipped through the rest like someone trying to catch up on a story they'd walked in on too late. It was about the house. Not the one I lived in now. My apartment was a rental, modest. Small, but the house where I'd raised them. The one I'd shared with Paul for nearly 40 years. The one with the green shutters and the creaky back steps and the lilac bush he'd planted for me the year we lost the baby. That house. We'd kept it after he passed. I couldn't bear to sell it right away. The market hadn't been good anyway, and I thought maybe one day it would go to the grandchildren. Maybe they'd want to fix it up. Maybe someone in the family would still see the value in it, not just as property, but as memory, as history. But Susan and Mark had other plans. What I held in my hands was a done deal, not a proposal, not a conversation. They had sold the house. Used power of attorney, an old one, drawn up during one of Paul's hospital stays when I was overwhelmed and distracted. Back then, the lawyer said it was precautionary, just paperwork. I didn't understand how permanent a signature could be, how it could be used later, like a key in the wrong hands. My name was on nothing. My consent was nowhere, but the documents were all there, signed, notarized, executed. The house had been sold to a developer, set to be demolished. By spring, I didn't cry. That surprised me. I just sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The tea grew cold in my hand. The silence around me felt different that day. Not peaceful, not routine. It was betrayal. Not loud, not messy, just cold and complete. I called Susan. She didn't answer. Mark texted me an hour later, meant to talk to you. It just made sense financially. We'll explain soon. But they never did, because what could they say? That my memories were a bad investment. That the home where I scrubbed muddy cleats from the carpet and marked their heights on the doorframe was worth more in someone else's hands. They didn't even go inside before the sale, hadn't walked through the rooms, hadn't opened the kitchen drawers where Paul used to keep his crossword puzzles. They hadn't stood in the hallway and remembered how Susan used to leave glitter everywhere during her fairy phase, or how Mark chipped the banister sliding down in his socks. They hadn't thought about me at all. I drove there the next day. The lawn was overgrown. A notice had been stapled to the fence, demolition permit. The developer's name at the bottom like a signature on a death certificate. I walked around the back, down the little path where the garden used to be. The gate creaked the same way it always had. For a second, I could almost hear Paul whistling from the shed. He used to build bird houses back there. Not for birds, really mostly for something to do with his hands. The windows were cloudy, but I pressed my face against the kitchen glass. The curtains were still there. Yellow gingham I'd sewn myself one summer when Susan went to camp. They were faded now, threadbare in places, but they were still mine. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for the sky to darken, long enough for the cold to find my knees, when I left. I didn't look back. There's a kind of goodbye that doesn't need ceremony. Just a deep breath and the sound of gravel under your feet. They'd crossed the line. Not by selling the house, though that hurt, but by deciding they didn't need to include me. That I was too old, too fragile, too irrelevant to be consulted about the place where my life had happened. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just being forgotten, I was being erased, quietly, systematically, and if I didn't act, there'd be nothing left of me in their story at all. That night, I lit a candle and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I opened to a blank page and wrote the words, "I am still here." Then I underlined them. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was grief, maybe something deeper. But that sentence felt like an anchor in a world that had been drifting without me. It was the beginning of something I hadn't dared imagine for years. A new kind of story. Not one built on their needs, not one built on waiting to be noticed. Mine, I made a list, people to call, questions to ask, things I still owned, things they didn't know I knew. It wasn't revenge I was after, just truth. I went to bed that night with my jaw clenched, but my heart strangely light. Like something that had been pressing down on me for years had finally shifted. I wasn't angry. Not really, I was awake. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to see what might happen next. They had taken something I loved, but they didn't know what I still had left. And I was about to remind them, not with words, not with confrontation, but with absence. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the match, and I had just found mine. After I found out they'd sold the house, I didn't say anything right away. No phone calls. No letters, no teary confrontations or doorstep. Showdowns, just silence. I think part of me had been rehearsing it for years, the stillness. It came easier than I expected, like something I'd already learned by heart. Silence is a powerful thing when it's deliberate, not the awkward kind that falls between people mid-conversation. No, this was the kind you choose. The kind that builds a wall brick by brick, not to keep people out, but to protect what's left of you inside. I stopped returning texts. I didn't block anyone. That would have been too loud. I simply stepped back. When Susan finally called 2 days after the documents had arrived, I let it ring. Her voice landed in my voicemail. Cheerful and clipped, like nothing had happened. "Hi, Mom, just wanted to check in. Hope everything's okay. Call me when you can." I didn't. Mark tried next. A short message. Heard from Susan. Everything good. No, everything was not good. But I had spent too many years translating my pain into something they could digest: polite disappointment, strained forgiveness, careful phrasing that never made anyone uncomfortable. So this time, I kept the words for myself. I started saving, quietly, not just money, though I did that too, every week, a little more tucked away, but energy. I stopped giving myself over so fully to people who didn't ask how I was before launching into how much they needed. I declined the next dinner invite, said I wasn't feeling well. That wasn't a lie. There's a kind of sickness that lives in the soul when you've been overlooked too long, in the quiet. I found clarity. I went through old files, looked at paperwork I hadn't touched in years. I found the copy of that power of attorney buried in a folder marked Paul, Health. It was older than I remembered, loosely worded. I took it to a lawyer a woman recommended by the lady who runs the thrift shop with me. We met in her office on a Tuesday afternoon. The room smelled like pine cleaner and coffee. She was kind, direct. She didn't speak to me like I was slow or fragile. She read through the documents, flipped through them twice, then looked at me with something almost like respect. "You have options," she said. I nodded, not out of triumph, just quiet affirmation that I had known something wasn't right. She walked me through them. explained what had been done legally and what had been done improperly. She showed me where I still had ground to stand on. I didn't even have to fight, just withdraw, reposition, close some doors, lock a few others. It was like learning that a key I thought I'd lost had been in my coat pocket all along. After that, I changed my banking permissions. I removed Mark's access to my accounts. I restructured the small life insurance policy I still had so it would go where I chose, not where default settings pointed. I contacted a financial advisor. I reviewed my will. I rewrote parts of it, not out of vengeance, but because I had remembered, finally, that my life was still mine. They hadn't asked about my health in months, but I went to my doctor anyway, got blood work done, started physical therapy for my knees. I even began walking in the mornings, early, before the city stirred. Just 3 blocks, then 4. I waved at the same dog walker every day. I started noticing which flowers bloomed first along the sidewalks. There was something healing in the repetition, in the small proof that I could change the rhythm of my life without asking anyone's permission. I began saying no more. No, I can't babysit on Thursday. No, I won't be coming over for dinner this weekend. No, I won't be driving out to the lake house, not this time. Each no was quiet, but firm, like lighting a candle and letting it burn down on its own time. They didn't argue. I think they thought I was just tired, maybe even slipping. That was fine. Let them believe what they needed to. Because beneath the silence, I was rebuilding. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but to reclaim something I'd lost long before the house, my self-respect, my boundaries. My voice, even if I chose not to use it out loud just yet. One night I pulled out an old photo album, not the glossy one Susan made with Shutterfly a few years ago, all filters and vacations, no, the old one, with yellowed pages and pictures tucked into sleeves, me in the hospital holding Susan for the first time, Paul asleep on the couch in flannel pants, one sock falling off, Mark grinning with chocolate on his chin. There we were, a life, a real one, messy, unfiltered, full of effort and noise and love that didn't ask to be repaid, only remembered. I ran my hand across the page, closed the album. I didn't feel bitter, I just felt done waiting, done trying, done shrinking, and in that stillness, I felt something else too. Hope, not the kind that looks forward, hoping others will change. The kind that looks inward and sees something still alive. Because they had tried to reduce me to a piece of paper, a name on a form, a signature they could use without speaking to the woman it belonged to. But I was more than that. I always had been, and soon they'd feel what it meant to be without me. Not because I would punish them, but because I would be gone, and the space I once filled with casseroles and calls and constant availability would go quiet. That silence they'd trained me into, it was about to become their teacher, and my peace. It's strange, the way power returns, not in a blaze, not all at once, but slowly, like blood returning to a numb limb. At first, there's nothing. Then a tingle, a pulse, a presence you forgot belonged to you. That's how it started. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly bold or brave. I just moved differently, a little quieter in their world, and a little louder in my own. The first change I made was my mornings. I stopped waiting for their messages, the ones that never came. I stopped checking my phone like it might hold love. Instead, I made my own rituals. I bought a French press secondhand from the church thrift store. I ground the beans myself, slow and steady, and let the smell fill my apartment. I played old jazz records while the coffee brewed. Billie Holiday, mostly. Her voice felt like an understanding. Not joy, not sorrow, just the truth of living. I bought a small notebook from the bookstore near the post office. It had a brown leather cover and unlined pages that felt soft under my fingers. I began writing in it every morning. Not for anyone else, not like the to-do lists I used to make. For the family, just thoughts, feelings I'd pushed away for decades. I wrote as if I were writing to someone who had loved me fully, even if no such person existed anymore. One morning, I wrote, "I no longer need to be seen to know I exist." I underlined it twice. Then I started going places without telling anyone. Nothing wild. I wasn't running away. Just small escapes, little secrets I kept for myself. A galley across town, a garden centre where I bought a rosemary plant I didn't need. A used book sale in the library basement where I spent $7 on novels I might never finish. There was a woman at the book sale, grey hair in a braid, wide denim skirt, glasses on a chain around her neck. She smiled at me like we were old friends. Asked if I liked mystery novels. I said yes. Though I hadn't read one in years, she laughed and said, "You seem like someone who notices things." It caught me off guard, how seen I felt in that one sentence. We spoke for a while. Her name was Judith. She led a writing group at the library on Thursday afternoons. She told me to come, even if you don't think you're a writer. That following Thursday, I did. I sat at the far end of the table. Quiet at first, most of them were older. Women like me. Some had lost husbands. Some were caregivers. Some just wanted to talk. No one asked who I belonged to. No one knew about my daughter's law firm or my son's real estate ventures. They only knew me by the way I spoke and listened. I began reading my journal entries aloud. Just small pieces, things I'd never said to anyone. They didn't flinch, they didn't interrupt. They nodded, hummed softly, closed their eyes when the words hit home. That hour every Thursday became my church. Then, one afternoon, Judith asked if I wanted to help her plant bulbs in the community garden near the bus depot. I hesitated, but then I said yes. We dug quietly, tulips, daffodils, crocuses. She told me where to place them. And I followed, dirt under my nails, sun on my shoulders. It was the first time in a long time I felt useful in a way that didn't end with exhaustion. That night, I slept deeply, not because I was tired, but because I was at ease. After that, I went every Saturday. I bought gloves with little rubber grips. I learned to recognize the feel of healthy roots. I started bringing coffee for Judith and the others. I didn't ask them about their pasts, and they didn't press me for mine. It was enough to be together, side by side, giving life to something that would bloom after we were gone. At home, I changed small things. I moved the photos off the mantel, not out of anger, just readiness. I boxed them up. Gently, I kept a few, not many. I took down the clock Susan had given me years ago, the one that ticked aloud, always. Off by a minute, I replaced it with a framed piece of pressed lavender from the garden. Still, quiet, honest. I got a small radio and played music while I cooked. Nothing fancy. Scrambled eggs with spinach, chicken with rosemary from the new plant. I made enough for myself. And no more. I no longer set out extra plates just in case. I donated half my wardrobe. The clothes I kept were the ones I liked, not the ones I thought they might approve of. Soft cardigans, worn jeans. A linen dress I hadn't worn since Paul took me dancing once at the VFW hall. I wore it on a Tuesday just to walk to the corner market. The cashier said, "You look nice today." I smiled, said thank you. Nothing more, but I carried that compliment with me all the way home. I didn't reply to Susan's texts. They came every couple of weeks, polite check-ins, usually followed by a request, a recipe, a date to remember, a favor to ask. I let them go unanswered, not to hurt her. Just to protect what I was building. I wasn't rebuilding relationships. I was rebuilding myself. And in doing so, I began to see how much of me they had overlooked, not just in the recent years, but always. They knew the woman who showed up, but not the one who dreamed. They knew the version of me that provided, not the one who wondered what else might have been possible one day. Judith handed me a flyer, a weekend writing retreat at a lake 2 hours away, cabins, workshops, solitude. It cost more than I was comfortable spending, but I said yes. I booked a cabin, took the train, packed a notebook, a sweater, and the photo of me holding Susan for the first time. That weekend, I wrote for hours. I walked by the water. I cried once, not out of sadness, but relief, like some invisible hand had finally loosened its grip around my ribs when I came back. I knew something had shifted for good. I was no longer waiting, not for apologies, not for permission. I was no longer available in the way I once had been, always ready, always near. I had moved differently, and soon the absence of that old version of me would be felt, not as punishment, but as fact, because when a woman stops being a shadow in her own life, those who only ever saw her as support begin to realize what they lost. But that part, that comes next, it didn't happen all at once. The quiet never does. It began with confusion, the kind that makes people tilt their heads and squint at the absence of something they can't name. I stopped showing up. No announcement, no grand exit, just a series of absences so soft they could have been missed. But they weren't. First was Susan's charity gala in late April. She'd sent the invitation 3 weeks before, one of those glossy envelopes with embossed gold lettering and a return address that looked more like a law firm than a family. She always expected me to be there, to play the part, dress nicely, smile, clap at the speeches, watch her from the side of the room like a proud emblem rather than a person. But I didn't go. I didn't send regrets. I didn't offer an excuse. I just let the seat stay empty. That Monday, she called, left a voicemail that danced between irritation and concern. "Hey, Mom, just wondering if you're okay. We missed you Saturday. I thought I told you it was important. I listened. I deleted." I didn't respond. Then came Mark's youngest daughter's birthday party in May. The kind with a hired magician, a bounce house, and a Pinterest-worthy cake. I had always brought homemade cookies. Always wrapped the presents in paper that matched the theme. This time, nothing arrived. No cookies, no gift, not even a card. Mark texted me the next day. "Didn't see you yesterday. Everything cool?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I powered off my phone. For years, they had leaned on me without noticing. I had become part of the architecture. A support beam they forgot was holding up the ceiling until it wasn't there. Now, the cracks had started. Susan emailed. Her tone had shifted, less brisk, more cautious. "Mom, I've been meaning to check in. Are you feeling all right? Let me know if you need anything." I almost laughed. The sudden urgency in her words had nothing to do with concern. It was a tremor in the ground she thought was solid. Not love, not even guilt. Just the realization that something she depended on might be gone. I knew she was starting to feel it. The gap in the holidays, the missing casseroles, the silence on birthdays, the lack of a reliable witness to her life. It was never about what I gave. It was about how expected I had made it all look. I stopped answering their questions, and they started asking more. They noticed when the little things didn't appear: the flowers on Father's Day for Paul's grave, the stocking stuffers for the grandchildren, the calendar reminders I always sent for their dentist appointments. They noticed when the gifts stopped arriving on time or at all, when the familiar handwriting no longer showed up in their mailbox. They started trying harder. A card showed up from Susan in June. No occasion, just a card, "Thinking of you. Hope you're doing something fun." Inside, a $25 gift card to a cafe I never visited. I kept it unopened on my counter for a week before tucking it in a drawer. In July, Mark stopped by unannounced. I saw him through the peephole. He stood there for a long time, holding a paper bag, probably something from that bakery he likes. I didn't open the door. He knocked, waited. Eventually, he left the bag on the doormat. Inside was banana bread, store-bought. I threw it away, not out of spite, just because I wasn't hungry. I heard from a neighbor that Susan had started seeing a therapist. It's hard, she apparently told someone. Mom's been acting different since her birthday. I think she's slipping. That made me smile, in a quiet, private way. Let them think I was fading. That I was forgetting things. It was easier for them than facing the truth that I remembered everything, and I had simply chosen not to explain any more. Judith, from the writing group, asked me once if I missed them. Sometimes I said, but not the way I thought I would, because what I missed wasn't really them. It was the version of me I used to be when I believed they saw me. I missed the woman who still held out hope that the giving would eventually be met with grace, but that woman was gone, not dead. Just transformed. Now I watched from a distance, and what I saw was interesting. Susan struggled with small things I used to smooth over like second nature. She forgot her husband's prescription one week and posted about it online, as if it were a failure of the universe, not just a gap in her own planning. Mark double-booked a flight and missed a client meeting. The babysitter cancelled. And for once, they didn't call me to fix it, because they knew I wouldn't. That was the new law of the land. I saw their lives begin to show the absence, not dramatically, just in the quiet unraveling of what I used to hold together with invisible thread. I was no longer the background music, and they didn't know how to handle the silence. They tried to fill it. Messages came more often now, longer. Ones with questions, not just how are you but what are you doing these days. They didn't realize that the very curiosity they were now expressing was the one I had starved for all those years. By then, it was too late. I had stopped reaching for the scraps. I had found a feast elsewhere in the garden beds I tended, in the friends who knew how to listen, in the journal pages I filled without censoring my own sadness. They lost me slowly, yes, but they also lost access to something more profound, my trust, my time, my instinct to cushion their every fall, and I think they knew it. One morning in late August, I passed Susan and her family at the farmer's market. They didn't see me. I stood near the peaches, a few stalls away, watching her juggle a bag of produce and try to quiet her youngest, who was crying about something sticky on his hands. I used to step in at moments like that. I used to carry the bags, wipe the hands, distract the tears. This time, I just watched. They didn't look miserable, just tired, unsteady, like something essential had gone missing, and they hadn't figured out how to replace it. I turned away before she could see me, walked down the next aisle, bought a small pie from a woman with flour on her apron and kindness in her eyes. Warm it a bit before eating, she said. Brings out the flavor. I nodded, said thank you, and when I got home, I did just that, ate the pie with a fork, standing over the kitchen sink. Sun pouring through the window like a quiet benediction. They were beginning to feel what it meant to live without me, not because I had disappeared, but because, for once, I had stayed exactly where I was, and stopped coming when called. It took me 3 weeks to write the letter. Not because I didn't know what to say, I did. The words had been living in me for years, buried under casseroles and carpool pickups, and the kind of patience that looks like strength but is really just exhaustion in nicer clothes. The truth is, I had been composing that letter long before. I sat down with pen in hand. It just took time to be ready enough to finish it. I wrote it in the quiet hours, early mornings, before the world started its noise. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, legs wrapped in a worn blanket, and let myself remember without shame, without trying to make anyone look better than they were, or worse. I didn't write it for Susan or for Mark. I wrote it to myself. To the version of me who used to believe that being needed was the same thing as being loved. It began simply, Dear Eleanor, I wrote, and paused. I hadn't written my full name in so long. Not on something personal. Not in a way that meant I was addressing the woman inside, not the mother, not the grandmother, not the placeholder, just Eleanor. I kept writing. I don't know when it happened the moment you started to disappear. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with a slammed door or a cruel word. It happened like dust collecting on a photograph, slowly, silently, until one day the frame was still there, but the image had faded. I wrote about the mornings I made lunches with shaking hands and no sleep, about the nights I stayed awake waiting for headlights in the driveway, rehearsing lectures that turned into whispered pleas, about the way love had been mistaken, over and over again, for duty. I want to tell you, I wrote, that you did everything right, even the parts you think you failed. Even the mistakes they came from love, from fatigue, from trying harder than anyone saw. I wrote about Paul, about how I used to trace the veins on his hand while we watched old westerns, how, even when he forgot my name near the end, he still reached for me in the dark. You survived losing him, you survived being invisible beside him, and still you made space for everyone else. You never once asked for applause. I wrote about Susan and Mark, too, not unkindly, just truthfully. You raised them to believe the world was soft because you made it that way. You taught them that love meant certainty because you were always there, even when it cost you. They learned to rely on you so deeply, they forgot to look at you. I paused again there. Because it wasn't just their forgetting that hurt. It was my silence in the face of it, the way I nodded when I wanted to scream, the way I made peace with being background. I wrote about the day of my birthday, how I stood by the window before leaving, watching a balloon bob on a string, how I had felt like a guest at my own life. That day wasn't the beginning, I wrote, but it was the moment you finally believed yourself. I folded the letter and tucked it in the journal. I didn't plan to send it, I didn't need to, because writing it was the release, a ritual of goodbye not to them, but to the version of me who thought I had to keep proving my worth. The next day, I walked to the community garden alone. It was warm for October, that golden, end-of-season warmth that clings to your skin like a parting gift. Judith was there, digging up the summer tomatoes, sorting through the last of the squash. I handed her a folded paper. "What's this?" she asked. "A letter," I said, "to someone I used to know." She smiled but didn't open it, just nodded like she understood. I left it with her. I don't know if she ever read it. Maybe she did. Maybe it wasn't for reading at all. Maybe it just needed to be carried by someone who saw me. That afternoon, I went home and cleaned my kitchen. I mean really cleaned it. I wiped every cabinet, emptied the drawers, got rid of the things I'd kept for decades without using chipped plates. Plastic measuring cups, spatulas with melted edges. I gave away the things I'd saved in case they visit, because I was no longer living in the shadow of their possible return. That night, I sat at the table and ate alone, not like a woman forgotten, but like a woman choosing peace, a woman who had stopped pretending she was fine with crumbs. I lit a candle, even though no one else was there to enjoy it, after dinner. I opened the window and let the breeze carry the scent of rosemary into the room. I took out the last picture of me and the kids together, that staged photo from the gala years ago, all teeth and tight shoulders, and quietly slipped it into a drawer. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't need to see it every day anymore. What I needed now was space, to remember who I was before I belonged to everyone else. I wrote another letter that night. Shorter this time, to the woman I am now. Thank you for staying, for waking up, for refusing to shrink again. I left that letter on the nightstand so I could read it whenever the ache returned, and it did, sometimes. Even after all the reclaiming, the quiet rebuilding, the new rhythms, the ache found its way back. But now I knew what to do with it. I didn't reach for them. I didn't try to explain. I simply picked up the letter, read my own words, let them settle like balm on old bruises, and reminded myself that I was not forgotten by the one who mattered most, me. The mornings come slower now, and I let them, no alarms, no obligation. Just the slow stretching of my legs beneath warm covers and the first sip of coffee before the world asks anything of me. Most days, it doesn't ask at all, and that, I've learned, is a gift. My name doesn't get spoken aloud much anymore. Not in the way it used to be summoned for favors, said half-heartedly down a hallway, called into rooms already turning away, but when it is spoken now, it feels different, fuller. As if someone means it when they say it, mostly that someone is me. Eleanor, I say sometimes, standing at the kitchen sink as the sun pours through the window, you did all right. It might sound odd, but saying my name to no one is one of the most healing things I've ever done. I still go to the writing group. Thursdays at the library. We've grown. There are a few younger women now, women in their 40s, still in the thick of raising families. Sometimes they cry when they read. Sometimes they laugh at things they didn't think were funny until the words left their mouths. I don't talk much, but when I do, they listen. I sit near the window, same seat every time. Judith brings me peppermint tea now. She knows my knees ache when it's about to rain. She never asks about my kids. That silence between us is not avoidance, it's respect. She sees the whole of me, not just the part that bore and bent. Every now and then, I'll get a card in the mail from Susan. They've become less frequent and less performative. Last one said simply, "Hope you're well, miss you. We're here if you change your mind." I didn't reply, not because I want her to suffer, I don't, but because I no longer feel the need to prove that I'm well or explain why I left when I did, even though I stayed right where I was. Mark tried to drop by again. I was out, left a note, said he'd love to talk, just to clear the air. There's nothing left in the air to clear. It's all settled now, like dust on a closed book. I don't wish them harm. I think that surprises some people how little bitterness I carry. But I never wanted revenge. I only ever wanted respect. And once I gave it to myself, I didn't need to beg for it elsewhere. I've learned how to make peace without applause. The apartment is still the same, small, lived in. There's a new rug in the living room, soft grey with faded flowers. I found it at a second-hand store for $15 and carried it home myself. It suits the place, suits me. I've started journaling in ink now. No more pencils. No more tentative words that can be erased. I want permanence in the things I say to myself. The rosemary plant has grown wild, almost stubborn in its survival. It leans toward the window now. I trimmed a few sprigs and tied them in ribbon last week. Gave them to the women at the library. Judith smiled, tucked hers behind her ear. There's something sacred in giving freely, when you know you don't owe anyone any more, on Sundays. I walk to the park, not to meet anyone, just to move, just to breathe in the stillness of trees that don't apologize for their seasons. I sit on a bench near the pond and watch the ducks, children run by. Some of them remind me of my grandchildren, but I no longer ache at the resemblance. I just notice, then return to my own breath. Sometimes I bring a thermos of tea and sit for hours doing nothing, not reading, not writing, just being, and in that stillness, I found something more valuable than approval. I found presence. There are days when I miss the noise, not the chaos of being needed, but the soft sounds of belonging, a voice calling from another room, laughter shared without effort, the smell of dinner on someone else's stove. But those memories are enough. I don't need to chase them anymore. Love, I've learned, doesn't always come from where you planted it. Sometimes it blooms in places you never thought to look. Like the hand of a woman you barely knew, offering a seat at a table you didn't think you deserved, or the way your own voice sounds when you stop shrinking it. I keep the letter I wrote to myself folded neatly in the drawer by my bed. I read it now and then, especially on the colder nights. Not because I've forgotten, but because it reminds me that I chose this, that the quiet I live in now is not the same as the silence I endured before. This quiet belongs to me, not given, not stolen, not inherited, claimed, and it's enough. There's no dramatic ending to this story, no reunion. No cinematic apology, just an older woman with soft hands and steady breath, living a life that finally fits the shape of her soul. Sometimes I still dream of the old house, the one with the green shutters and the creaky back steps. In the dream, I walk through the kitchen, and Paul is there, humming. The radio's playing something low and sweet. He hands me a cup of tea. I sit, no one speaks, we just are, and I wake up smiling, not because I want to go back, but because I know I never really left myself behind there. Just waited until I was ready to come home to me. Now, the only door I answer is the one inside. The only permission I need is already mine, and if you've followed me through this story, thank you for sitting in the quiet with me, thank you for seeing me. I wasn't angry, I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. There's something about living through the quiet that changes what you hear. Not just around you, but within you. In the past, my life had been full of noise. Not loudness in the usual sense, not traffic, or music, or conversation, but the kind of noise that comes from being constantly needed. A low hum of expectation, movement, obligation. You begin to mistake it for purpose. That's the trick. You think if I'm needed, I matter. If they call, I exist. If I respond, I belong. But what I know now is this: being needed is not the same as being loved. I wish someone had told me that sooner. I might have listened, or maybe not. Maybe I had to live it all to understand what I know now. Maybe the ache was the only way in, these days. I wake up and take my time. I speak slower, softer, not because I've weakened, but because I no longer rush to be heard by people who weren't listening. I listen to myself now, my breath, my body, the way my thoughts move before I catch them. Some mornings I just sit, let the tea steep longer than necessary. Let the sun fall across my lap without rearranging myself. There's no place I'm late for, no one I must prove anything to. The word enough has taken on a new meaning, not as a measurement of success or satisfaction or what others think of me, but as a quiet completion, a full stop at the end of a long sentence. And in that stillness, I've found the things that truly fill me: long walks without agenda, the weight of a good book in my lap, the smell of rosemary crushed between my fingers, the silence after laughter when you realize you weren't holding anything back. Judith says I've changed. She told me once, after writing group, you seem softer now, but not smaller, like someone who's stopped bracing. I hadn't realized I'd been bracing, but I had for years. Bracing against disappointment, against the sting of being ignored. The ache of erasure, it lives in the body. You know that kind of sorrow. It curls your shoulders, it shortens your breath. It makes you tiptoe through your own home, trying not to need too much. Now I stand upright. Now I walk slower, not because I can't go fast, but because I want to feel where I am. I know my life will end one day. That's not morbid, it's true, but what I know now is that I will not die unlived. There is no grand finale planned, no surprise reunion, no last-minute mending. The letters I once waited for may never come. The apologies, the acknowledgements, they might remain buried. And that's all right, because my healing didn't depend on them waking up. It depended on me deciding I was already whole. I think about that a lot, how many women have gone before me, their stories swallowed in the folds of their families. Grandmothers who were never asked what they loved. Mothers who were never seen as more than what they gave. Women who died with names no one remembered to use. I remember them. Every time I say my own name aloud, Eleanor, I remember them when I light a candle for no reason other than to soften the room, when I make a meal for one and sit down like I'm hosting the Queen, when I laugh too loud or speak too slow, or walk past a mirror and tell myself, you look lovely today. Because what I know now is that dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you plant inside, water quietly, and protect from erosion. And it grows. My days are small by some standards. I make soup, I water plants, I write notes to myself, I watch the clouds roll in from the east and guess whether the rain will stay or pass. I sometimes hear children's voices outside my window, and I smile. I think of Susan's youngest, who must be starting school now. I wonder what books he likes, whether he still asks about me. Maybe one day he will. Maybe one day I'll write him a letter, not to explain, but to remind him of who I was, who I still am, not the woman they forgot at a birthday party, but the woman who made the cake, cleaned the dishes, sat alone while they danced, and still smiled, the woman who stayed too long at the edge of her own life and then chose to step inside it, fully, alone, yes, but not lonely, because here's the last thing I know now, you can miss people without needing them back, you can forgive someone without letting them back in. You can love your children and still walk away from the versions of them that never saw you. You can make peace without being asked to, and you can truly live after being forgotten. I used to think life came in chapters, but now I think it comes in turns, some gentle, some sharp, some you see coming, some that knock the breath from your chest. But if you stay still long enough, the road reveals itself again, and where I am now, this quiet, blooming space is a turn I never expected, and it is enough. So if you're still here, listening, I hope you know something too. I hope you know that your value isn't in how many people need you. It's in how tenderly you hold yourself when no one else does. It's in the way you choose not to disappear even when others stop looking. And it's in your name. Say it out, loud, even if no one's around to hear. Say it until it feels like a song again. You're still here, and that's more than enough.